There's several ways I can address the problem of affirmative action. And of course, it's very timely because just this year, the Supreme Court held against the University of North Carolina and Harvard universities for their affirmative action policies, which were discriminating in favor of racial minorities. And they told them, no, you can't do that. And now that Supreme Court decision, which came down this year on a 6-3 vote, and you know who voted yes and who voted no, was a devastating blow to many of the universities that had not been handling this before. But we had a different experience at UCLA, and I'll give you a little bit background there. When I was still an assistant professor, the dean of the medical school, my friend and mentor, Jim Melnicott, called me and asked me if I'd chair the admissions committee. This was 1970, and I did that until 1995. At that point in time, UCLA Medical School had graduated one black student, one black doctor in its 25 or so years. Now the school started in 1951. So from 1955 to 1970, there was one black graduate and no Hispanic graduates, as far as we could tell. The result of that was taking over the admissions committee and a concerted effort to apply affirmative action as defined by John Kennedy in 1981 when he was president, an executive action where he directed universities and corporations to public entities to do what they could to bring in people of color, which had previously been denied. In 1964, there was a Civil Rights Act when Lyndon Johnson was president, and that had a tremendous effect on providing equal rights to minorities, but in practice, it didn't really happen very well, and especially for medical schools. We had a different problem in medical school. We had knowledge of the fact that, like for example, in Beverly Hills, there was one physician for every 200 people. In Watts Willowbrook, there was one physician for every 10,000 people. So we knew that we had our work cut out for us. We embarked merrily into an affirmative action program. We reached out to high schools and colleges. We did enrichment courses in summer. We did everything we could to attract minority students of color to the medical school, and we were doing pretty well. We were getting more and more students. In 1978, a bombshell dropped, and that was the Bakke decision. Alan Bakke was a 33-year-old ex-Marine who applied for medical school to the University of California at Davis. And Davis turned him down because they had a quota. They had 100 spots in the first-year class, and they were taking 16% of those 16 people who were minorities, black, brown. Bakke sued, and this wound its way through the courts, and eventually was found that Davis was wrong because they had a quota. And so the Supreme Court decision that year said, thou shalt not have a quota. But it doesn't mean you can't consider race as one factor in admissions, which we continued to do. We went merrily along until 1996 when the state of California passed Proposition 209, which wiped out affirmative action for public institutions, including the university. How did we handle that? We did a number of things. We created a a subcommittee of our admissions committee, chaired by one Hispanic professor and one black woman who was a pediatric cardiologist, and staffed it with mostly minority faculty. And when students applied and were considered to be disadvantaged, if they asked to be considered by disadvantaged economically or ethnically or whatever, they were referred to this committee. And this committee vetted these students, interviewed them, and then selected the ones that they would present to the admissions committee in general. And we were doing pretty well. We were getting up to, 15%, up to 20% maybe, of students of color coming in as first-year students. In 2023, all of this has come to an end. The 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court has said that you can't discriminate on the basis of the 14th Amendment, that you can't discriminate the equal rights. You can't discriminate against any person who is based on ethnicity or color or race or religion or country of origin or gender. And at that point, we were not that much affected. We haven't been that much affected as of now, because we had put this we call the disadvantage subcommittee into place, and they were doing, I think, yeoman work in recruiting and vetting and recommending to the admissions committee students of color. The other thing that happened is that women became the recipients of some of this. The original Civil Rights Act also said that thou shalt not discriminate against women. My medical school class at the University of Chicago, we had 72 graduates. We had 3 women. And that was pretty much the way it was in most of the medical schools around the country. That number has risen steadily, so that now there are actually somewhat more women in the entering class at UCLA than there are men. In fact, the next minority group is going to probably be a white male. The difficulty about having people identified by gender or race or ethnicity is that you start stereotyping and clicking off boxes. And no longer we can do that, but you can't really decide on somebody who's going to be a good doctor by how they do as far as their performance in college. So there's a very, very vigorous interviewing process and so forth. In this year, when the Supreme Court came down with the decision, Chief Justice Roberts left a little crack in the door, and he said, I quote, writing for the majority, he said, the decision doesn't prevent universities from considering an applicant or applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life. So I think the schools that have not adapted like UCLA did in the 70s and 80s and 90s are going to go that direction. I think UCLA will become a model for most of the other medical schools in terms of considering students who come from a disadvantaged background. Whatever that disadvantage is, they're allowed to discuss in their application how being a minority or being impoverished or being anything else which creates a disadvantage has affected their life, and whether or not it should be a factor in their admission to medical school. I think it's extremely important for medical school because, as I say, the maldistribution of physicians in minority communities is really something. And hasn't gotten much better over the years. Interestingly, too, as a sidebar, that in the Supreme Court decision, Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Sotomayor were both recipients of affirmative action. Isn't that interesting? They both got into law school, but university and law school, as a result of the fact that affirmative action was used. The Bakke decision was a bombshell, really. Bakke went to Davis, successfully completed medical school. For those of people who know Lois Barnes in the community, recently retired, she was a classmate of Ellen Bakke. And I've had occasion to ask her about Alan Bakke. He went into anesthesiology and eventually wound up practicing somewhere in the Midwest. I think he's retired now. The Bakke decision is what led us to create the disadvantaged subcommittee. People always would kid me and say, the subcommittee is not disadvantaged, the applicants are disadvantaged. But nevertheless, we knew what we were doing, and I think we were generally successful. I think that all in all, rather than give you a law school lecture or go through
Nothing yet. Nothing yet.
That's about a 5.2. This is an earth-shaking talk on the prospects for the future, I think, are not great, but I think we'll get better. I was looking at current enrollments for medical schools around the country, and the school with the highest percentage of black students is Howard University. In Kamala Harris's alma mater, they have a medical school, and they have 70% of their students are black. But that's a historically black college and university. I think another one is Mahari, another one was, I can't remember, 2 or 3 like that. The most students in other schools, UCLA right now, I think ranks 8 in terms of the percentage of black and brown students. That percentage right now is about 13%. My alma mater, University of Chicago, is a little bit ahead of UCLA. It's about 17%. Most of the other schools that are highly selective, I'm talking about Duke and North Carolina and South Carolina, and all the other schools, the state schools and private schools that have medical schools, run about maybe about 12% of students who have been admitted to the medical school first year class. What will happen at UCLA. It happened at UCLA back in the Bakke days. We had a precipitous drop in the number of admissions of black and brown students. And then we had to go to work on it with our disadvantaged subcommittee to bring that back up. Went down to about 2%, and came back up to where it is now. All these other colleges who have been relying on affirmative action will have I think, a tough time, but they're probably going to do something like we did, create a separate committee or subcommittees to consider all other factors that would lead to somebody being considered disadvantaged and how that might affect their ability to function as a physician, realizing what their responsibilities are in terms of the communities they serve. Interestingly, I was invited to the Regents meeting in 19 96, when they were considering, no, it was 19, after the Bakke decision, it was actually late 70s, early 80s, when the university decided they were going to completely eliminate, UC that is, was going to completely eliminate affirmative action. This was championed by a lawyer, attorney, who was on the Board of Regents. That's the governing body of the University of California for all the campuses. His name is Ward Connerly. He is a black lawyer, and he was the most outspoken critic of affirmative action. He took me and Mike Drake, who was the chairman of the admissions committee at UC San Francisco, to breakfast one day at the Regents meeting up in San Francisco, and explained to us why he was against affirmative action. He made a very good point. He said that students are admitted under affirmative action are put under a yoke. They've got a burden. That sometimes is never alleviated. It destroys their sense of self-worth. They look around and they say, you know, I got into medical school not because of my merits, but because I'm black or because I'm Hispanic. And so Ward Connerly made that point to the Regents, and that was what prompted the Regents in 1996 to uphold Proposition 209 in the state of California and eliminate affirmative action for all university admissions, both undergraduate and graduate. Interestingly, Mike Drake became a friend of mine because he was, at that time, the new chairman of the admissions committee at UC San Francisco. He's now the president of the university. He is a black student, who's a black physician who's an ophthalmologist. And we went up to argue that in front of the Regents that we really wanted affirmative action. We wanted to restore, we wanted to be able to identify black and brown students so that we could address these needs in the community. But the Regents didn't listen, and they limited it. They said, we're going to have a colorblind university, totally colorblind. Well, that's the way it is going to be now from now on. So that's my story, really, basically. I did this for 25 years. It was very, very rewarding. And the dean of the School of Medicine, Sherm Mellenkopf, who was my mentor, and the reason I went into GI, gastroenterology, he was a gastroenterologist, and he was my first attending physician on the medical wards before he became dean. He was the one that called me and asked me to chair the admissions committee. Sherm was a wonderful man. I tell this story because he was a humble man. We were at a fundraising one night, and we had our badges on. His said Dean, School of Medicine, UCLA. Mine said Associate Dean, School of Medicine, UCLA. And a lady came by and said, through the reception line, said, well, what's the difference between an Associate Dean and a Dean? And Sherm's answer was, an Associate Dean is a mouse studying to become a rat. And that was Sherm. He also was the one that, for those of you who are older, who read Rudyard Kipling, when he was dean for 26 years, which was unheard of. Most deans would, half-life of a dean was about 3 years, and still is. Sherm was dean for 26 years. When he was given praise at various dinners and receptions and so forth, he said, no, the last great dean was Gunga. So, questions?
Questions? I remember you talking a little bit about how hard it is to get into medical school and how many applications you get and how many you rejected.
Right.
You might mention that. But, and I also remember you talking about there are not enough doctors because there's not enough medical schools or places in medical schools.
Well,
Could you comment on those?
That's being corrected. The number of medical schools has grown, and more community medical schools where there's not as much academics but more hands-on teaching. But this is several years ago that I gave this talk at Rotary about the difficulty getting into medical school. It is still difficult. The average, grade point average for a student entering UCLA is about a 3.8, and about the 90 to 95th percentile or higher on the medical college admissions test. UCLA is currently processing about almost 4,000 applicants for 142 places. And that's the way it is for most of the other selective schools. They're overwhelmed by applicants. So you can see why the minority students were sort of left adrift in the old days, because they just didn't have the background. They didn't have the grades. They didn't have the high test scores.
Yeah.
And yet, when they were admitted to medical school, and we enriched them with extra courses and mentors and so forth and so on, they might have had a tough time in the first 2 years of medical school, which are generally given off to the basic sciences, biochemistry, physiology, anatomy. And the third and fourth year, which we start seeing patients, that's where they shine. They start picking up the skills from the people that they're attending physicians and the resident physicians. And we've graduated many fine minority students, both for the community and for academic medicine. The chairman of the Department of Medicine now in, I think it's the University of Chicago, but actually on my alma mater, is black. And they're spread around the country as role models and very effective physicians and teachers. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember background. Well, first off, thank you for that literally ground-shaking speech. Really enjoyed that. The entire earth.
Shook you guys up.
So, I'm forgetting the context for this most recent decision. Wasn't it a group of Asian students
Yeah.
from Harvard?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was what can you tell us a little bit about that background?
Actually, these were Asian students that brought the suit and brought it all the way to the Supreme Court. They felt that they were being discriminated against. And yet, if you look at the numbers in medical schools, Asians are very well represented, but they felt that they were, on an individual basis, many of them being turned down because they were getting, the schools were not just bowing down to white applicants, but also to black and Hispanic students. So that was the basis of the Supreme Court suit in this year.
Dr. Pops, thanks for sharing that. Just a fun fact, I was at UCSB from 95 to 2000, and it was just as a lot of the discussion with affirmative action was going on, and I remember Regent Connerly, Ward Connerly, was not very liked by many of the student organizations, particularly because of his stance on affirmative action.
Right.
But what was interesting, and I got involved, I was attending the UC Regents meetings as a member of the University of California Student Association, and soon after that, the discussions came up on domestic partnership. This was before gay marriage had become legalized. And what was interesting is it was a good example of coming across the political lines, because while he was conservative, he actually took a strong stance in favor of domestic partnership. And so when that historic vote came up at UCLA, I was there, and the governor, Pete Wilson, came out on that vote. He was one of the dissenting votes in favor of domestic partnership, but it kind of a lesson when you look at politics. For me, it was learned to be able to have that conversation and make it across political lines. I just kind of interesting as you brought up the name Regent Connerly, that all kind of run back up.
He was. We considered him a nightmare.
So did the students, which was interesting because that vote came down to one, and he was in favor because he had such strong beliefs of equality which was his argument around not having affirmative action.
But
And then he stood true to his convictions on that, and on this side, he
Sure.
landed in favor of domestic partnership, which is
That-
really
that-
interesting individual.
That breakfast with Mike Drake and myself, he didn't convince us actually, but I understood where he was coming from when he was talking about the loss of self-worth.
Yeah.
If you're a minority student who's gotten a leg up because of affirmative action, that's why he was against it.
Strong conviction.
Yeah, Deidre.
Just while you were talking, I grew up in Dublin, which was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, homogeneous society. Nobody was immigrating into Ireland because of the economy. But when we walked around Dublin, if we saw a person of color, we knew they were going to the College of Surgeons. So I'm wondering if people of color went to other countries to get educated. But that would be the only black people we saw, we just knew. That's why they were in Dublin.
That's interesting. It may have been, but the other place for educating physicians, minority and black and brown, was the Caribbean, and it still is to some extent. In some of the Caribbean islands, medical schools are started, private medical schools, and they attracted and encouraged applications from black and brown students. The students, if they graduate those schools, they have to get clerkships in the United States. They have to go through a foreign medical graduate test. They have to try to get an internship from California or a U.S. hospital, and so they go through an awful lot in order to become physicians. We have some people here in Ojai and Ventura who graduated from Guadalajara, for example, and they're damn good doctors. That's good.
Marty, you've covered most of my question, but you mentioned that the UCLA school has less than 150 in each class, right?
Yes.
So if you took all the top tier medical schools in the country, what percentage of doctors that come out every year are top tier? And if they don't make it to UCLA, they can go, a lot of those people are going to go somewhere and become a doctor.
Right.
Right, and the number, that just is staggering to me that it's so small.
Well, many needs need to be addressed, and it's true. UCLA has about an average number of students. University of Illinois has like 300 graduates, so it varies up and down the country. The most selective schools have become more interested in taking care of the academic needs by encouraging research. And in fact, at UCLA, for example, the obtaining of an MD, PhD has become very, very big. And these are students that stay in academic medicine, do research and teaching, and get their PhD by spending a year or two more in medical school than they otherwise would. So we're still not turning out enough doctors. It's gone back and forth. Several years ago, we thought there were too many doctors. Now, as a result of demographics and population expansion, we're not training enough doctors. Don?
A quick question about how much would it cost a student to go to medical school? And, can you discriminate on economics?
Sure, yeah.
Right.
That's one of the deterrents for black and brown students, so that the schools who have been successful have been able to get rather large grants for scholarships. University of Pennsylvania now, which is a good place for attracting minority students as well as students from an impoverished background, they provide tuition-free education for 4 years. At UCLA, we get about half of the need for the students met. But the schools vary from time to time,
Right.
from
Yeah.
place to place. The average medical school now, a private medical school, like getting through Stanford, it's gonna cost about $65,000-$70,000 a year. At UCLA, I don't know, it's about 22 now. So there's a difference between the public universities and the private schools. All right, thank you very much.
We have a little gift for you. There we go. I know. I was gonna say, like ice cubes to the Eskimos.
Thank you, Marty.
Thank you, Marty. That was a great presentation. Truly